Can everyone see the orange background with the title page?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you for having me once again. I'm so excited to be here with you all again today. I'm elated that you're joining me for this presentation on sensitive periods and how they relate to Montessori pedagogy. But first, before we get started, I'd like to share just a few details that define me as your host and the creator of this presentation today. So my name is Heather White, like Dr. Lambert said. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and an in-home caregiver with more than 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori education. Currently, I work as an educational consultant, an instructional guide for adult learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification through the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. And I'm also a blog writer and content creator for several different organizations like the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Miru's Toys. I hold certifications from the American Montessori Society in the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age groups, a master's in education with a concentration in Montessori studies, and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. Today, we're going to be looking at those sensitive periods. So while we're together during this session, we're going to cover a range of topics. We'll start with identifying what sensitive periods are. We'll talk about their characteristics and the timing of when these sensibilities occur. We'll review some common examples of sensibilities, and we'll learn ways to encourage and promote them. And like Dr. Lambert said, I would love for this to be participatory. So if at any time you have any questions or comments, please feel free to place them in the chat or to raise your hand so that this is a really collaborative experience for you all. I wanted to start by sharing a quote with you from Dr. Montessori herself about sensitive periods. In her book, The Secret of Childhood, Dr. Montessori shares that a child learns to adjust himself and make acquisitions in his sensitive periods. These are like a beam that lights interiorly or a battery that furnishes energy. It is this sensibility which enables a child to come into contact with the external world in a particularly intense manner. At such a time, everything is easy, all is life and enthusiasm. Every effort marks an increase in the child's power. Only when their goal has been obtained does fatigue and the weight of indifference then come on. So this idea of sensitive periods really began with the Dutch biologist Hugo de Vries. He was one of the first to notice what he called sensitive periods in development, but he actually was referring to a species of caterpillar. And he noticed that these baby caterpillars had a special sensitivity to light when they emerged from eggs on the trunk of a tree, which caused them to then be drawn to the tips of the branches, where they were able to eat these more tender, new buds. The caterpillars lost that sensitivity, he found, over time when they grew bigger and stronger and were able to eat the tougher, older leaves. And it's interesting to note that that sensitive period he saw for caterpillars disappeared over time when it was no longer needed. And so that disappearance is equally as important as the presence of that sensitivity. So Dr. Montessori took that information because she was a scientist by nature herself. So she really focused on these observations and information that scientists developed, their theories. So she philosophized that something similar to what Hugo de Vries saw in caterpillars happened in childhood. And contemporary research has actually shown that children do indeed pass through these certain critical periods that are conducive to developing very specific skills. They're windows of opportunity when a child's brain is really, really efficient at developing specific types of learning. And that's why at these particular times, children show intense, overwhelming interest in certain objects or activities, which at a later time might come across as very boring to them. They might be very disinterested. So about 100 years ago is when Dr. Montessori started borrowing these ideas from biologists, physicians, and philosophers like de Vries, Sagun, and Itard, And she proposed that each child carried within them two types of genetic designs, one that she called physical and one she called psychical. The physical plan is what determines a child's height, their hair color, their eye color, and other physical attributes. The psychic plan, on the other hand, is where these sensitive periods really come into play. So thinking about what we've talked about so far, I would love to just take a moment and for each of you to kind of pause and think about what you think sensitive periods might be, given the description of how Hugo de Vries found what this looks like in caterpillars and the idea that it's a light that beams interiorly. Feel free to raise your hand or just pop in the chat what you think sensitive periods might be in a child's development. I'll pause just a moment to let you think about that. I know that can kind of sound like a heavy question without maybe some background about Montessori pedagogy. It sounds like a heavy term, sensitive periods.
Yeah, in a way, it sounds like emotionally sensitive to things where
Yeah,
they might be apprehensive or anxious about something.
yeah, it does. When we think about sensitivity, right, and we're being sensitive to something, it does kind of make you think that there might be some apprehension or some trepidation there. If we were sensitive to something, that is certainly what we would consider the feelings um, that we might have. And so it's interesting because that word sensitivity kind of gives us a different idea, a different interpretation than might be the case that we're going to discover here. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump in and look at what Dr. Montessori meant when she talked about sensitive periods. So Dr. Montessori's definition of sensitive periods are a critical time in a child's development, and they inform many Montessori practices. Understanding these sensitive periods can support parenting and caregiving in lots of positive ways. These sensitive periods that Dr. Montessori identified originally happen exclusively in the first plane of development, which if you're able to join us, we are going to have a presentation next Friday on the planes of development and what those look like. But Dr. Montessori said that the time from birth to 6 years of age was the first plane of development. And the sensitive periods she identified and really spoke a lot about happened then. There are other sensitive periods that happen for children as they get a little older into adolescence and even into the elementary years. But for today, we're going to focus mostly on those first 6 years of life. And so Dr. Montessori said that these sensitive periods are times when a child has a heightened ability to develop a skill or to acquire knowledge quickly and with ease. They can be thought of as explosions in a child's development that serve as the foundation for characteristics that they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. So we really are laying the groundwork for education and life that will come later. Other people might think of sensitive periods as a type of compulsion where children become absolutely obsessed with acquiring a specific skill or gaining this new knowledge. For instance, you can think about that child that becomes so interested in learning how to pull themselves up to a standing position that they keep continuing to do it over and over and over again. They might even skip their nap in order to keep practicing this skill. And they do it without a sense of frustration when they fail. They do it without appearing bored. They're just absolutely in the moment and enjoying this repetition as they're trying to gain this new skill in their development. So here's another question that I'd like you to ponder for just a minute. Again, maybe you just sit with the thought. Feel free to pop your ideas in the chat or raise your hand. But now that we have a baseline understanding of what sensitive periods are from Dr. Montessori's perspective, I'd like you to think about how they might be helpful in working with children. How can this knowledge of these times when children grasp knowledge and understanding quickly and with ease, or this drive that children have to explore these different areas of development, How might that be important for us to know as the adult and working with children? Exploring here to see if anyone has any thoughts.
You can go ahead and write into chat. Just click on chat and you'll see a box at the bottom to write your comments in there. But if you're aware of these sensitive periods when a child begins to get inspired by things, what would you do? Right? Is that the question?
Yeah, how do you think that's helpful? Like, how might you respond if you see a child? Think about that situation if you're a parent yourself. If you see that child who's repetitively doing something, and there's just this immense joy that you see when they're engaged in the activity, what might you do to kind of support them in that journey?
Well, I would say as a parent, I want to make sure they have the resources they need to explore. Like if they're exploring music, maybe get them a musical instrument.
Absolutely, Dr. Lambert. And that's the same way that we would approach it in a Montessori classroom. As an educator, we want to make sure that the environment is prepared. If you were able to join us when we talked about kind of the basis of Montessori, one of those founding principles, something that's so important in the Montessori triad is what it was called, is the prepared environment, the prepared adult, us as the educator, and then the child. And our role is to connect them to that environment in meaningful ways. So making sure they have what they need in order to really explore these sensitive periods and to gain this knowledge that they're so desperately excited to seek. So let's go ahead and move forward then and look at how it can be helpful to understand these sensitive periods. So understanding a child's interests allow us to do what Dr. Montessori called as follow the child. This is where we can identify these interests and preferred activities and then introduce activities or materials like Dr. Lambert and I were discussing that align with those interests. This is going to allow us to promote that child's brain development through the creation of that prepared environment. And each of these sensitive periods really provide us as the adult with a unique opportunity to greatly influence a child's growth and development. What is the age range for this sensitive period? Great question. So we're going to look in just a moment at specific sensitive periods. And when we get to each one, let's say we talk about the sensitive period for movement or the sensitive period for language. We'll go over for each one what that time frame looks like because it's a little different for each. In general, all of the sensitive periods we're going to talk about today are going to happen between the ages of birth to age 6. There are others that come a little bit later, but the ones that we'll focus on today are in that age range. So some sensitive periods are so noticeable that even those who might not have a background in the Montessori method would be able to notice them easily. For instance, the Montessori sensitive period for movement, you can think about a child who's learning to crawl or learning to walk. Those are things that will be easily recognizable. You can see very easily that that's something the child is practicing and attempting to master. But recognizing other sensitive periods might be a little easier than you think too. You might find yourself wondering at some point why a child wants to repeat the same song or have you read the same story over and over and over again. And as an adult, you're thinking, aren't they getting bored? We've read this story so many times. Although it might seem unnecessary, this is actually a classic symptom of a sensitivity. The repetition is never tiring for the child. They find great joy and peace in the activity. They have a high tolerance for failure within the repetition, meaning that they're exerting this really intense and meaningful effort. And you might also observe that sensitive periods come with a restful and tranquil state that happens at the culmination of the activity after this period of intense concentration and repetition. Some other characteristics of sensitive periods are mimicking and compulsive or obsessive behaviors like we talked about before. Interestingly, going back to what we talked about in the beginning of that that sensitivity and what we think that might mean as an adult, these intense feelings, that might also arise when you interrupt a child when they're in the middle of this intense sensitive period. It's going to be this powerful emotional response, maybe is what we think with a toddler as a tantrum. If you break a routine where a child is attempting to understand and master something, like let's say the child trying to get dressed on their own, or their bedtime or bath time routine, you break that and it looks different than normal. Some children are going to just emotionally fall apart. If you think about what people often call the terrible twos, really this is just an exaggerated reaction to small disruptions and a child's sense of order that we really don't recognize as adults. They likely are in a sensitive period for learning, and their work is being interrupted by us. So being attuned to these moments where children have strong emotional responses can also help us as adults to identify what the child's sensibilities are at that particular time. I see some notes here. It's important to be knowledgeable about the sensitive periods in children, to be aware of their needs. Absolutely. Play and rest. Yes. So both of those are going to be important sensitive periods. And we'll see how those come into play in just a moment when we dive a little deeper. So looking at that idea of those strong emotional responses, right? Sensitive periods manifest themselves in two different ways. The first is positive and the second is negative. The signs that a positive manifestation is occurring is that intense joy, that intense focus, a tremendous level of activity. And these are signs that a child's needs are being met by the environment and that they're able to really explore those interests, explore those compulsions they're feeling as being in that sensitive period. And in negative manifestation, however, the child's environment is not providing them with what they need in order to develop that sensitive period. And this can often be really frustrating for a child and cause those big feelings. So it might not only be our interruption as the adult in a child's activity, but maybe they're just not able to find those materials they were needing. Like Dr. Lambert was saying, if a child's really interested in music, if we're not providing those musical instruments for a child to explore, and that's really what they're craving, we might also see those emotional responses in those moments as well. So when we're looking at timing, there isn't a specific timeline of when sensitive periods occur, how long they might exist, the length of time they'll last, but the timing is unique to each individual child. There's a window where we've observed over the 100 years since Dr. Montessori developed her philosophy that we can say they typically happen between this age and this age, but it will be unique to each child. What you're going to be looking for is signs that the sensitive period is occurring. So when you're seeing that intense joy, concentration, repetition, and then also you can look for the end of a sensitive period that should be really recognizable as you're observing the child when they become disinterested in an activity, they grow tired of engaging in a task that formerly they were really, really excited about, focusing intently on, repeating over and over again. So that's a sign to you as the adult that that sensitive period has ended. It's also important to know that sensitive periods are transitive states. So once the aim of a particular sensibility is accomplished, then the period will disappear. So sensitive periods are never relived or regained, and they don't occur in a specific order. In fact, a child may experience multiple sensitivities at one time. So it's important to mention in saying that when we talk about sensitive periods not being relived or regained, that even if a sensitive period is missed, it doesn't mean that a child is not going to be able to master that skill. I know as a parent or an educator, it can be a little intimidating to think, wow, if I'm not observing every single sensitive period my child is in, and they're never able to relive that, are they going to miss things in their development? The answer is no. But the long answer is that it just means that it's going to be a little more challenging for them to gain that skill or absorb that knowledge. There might be less joy in the process. It's going to take more time and effort to reach mastery. Think about it as like an adult attempting to learn a second language. It's possible, we can certainly do it, but it is much more challenging for us to do so than it is for a child. And Dr. Montessori said that when the sensitive period has disappeared, intellectual victories are reported through reasoning processes, voluntary efforts, and the toil of research. And from the torpor of indifference is born the weariness of labor. So she's saying it's not impossible. It just means it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of time. There's going to be feelings of indifference. The child's going to become tired of the activity instead of having this intense joy. So like I said, Dr. Montessori identified 6 different sensitive periods that take place from birth to age 6, which were language, order, movement, refinement of the senses, small objects, which is also sometimes called tiny details, and social behaviors, which in Montessori is called grace and courtesy. There is actually some debate now amongst Montessorians about the real number of sensitive periods. Some Montessorians today, through their own observation, tend to add an additional 6 sensitive periods during this original plane of development from birth to 6, like toilet learning, music, mathematics, spatial relationship, and then they've separated out reading and writing. So it's something additional to that overarching sensitive period of language. So in our time together today, we're just going to focus on those original 6 that Dr. Montessori herself identified. And it's important to note before we do that while some of these interests and activities do persist throughout life, right? We may always explore an interest in grace and courtesy or in those social behaviors. We're still engaging in social behaviors and interactions as adults. We're still using language and reading and writing, and we might have a really intense interest in reading as we get older. But what Dr. Montessori was saying is that the ages that were noted for these sensitive period are really just the onset and the conclusion of the sensibility itself. So not the entire category or behavior, but really just looking at that time when that intense focus and joy and need for repetition occurred. So that's
Heather,
what we're going to
I have a question right now.
Absolutely.
How would television affect all of this?
That's a great question. So if you're looking at, let's take for instance, the interest or the sensitive period for movement. So there is some research to show that when children are young children, right? If we're looking at birth to 6, when young children are watching television, they become so entranced almost that they're distracted from these sensitive periods because they're so engaged. There's so much stimulation that's taking place that they're not thinking about their drive for these other desires. And so actually there's indication from the American Pediatrics Association that screen time isn't advised for children under the age of 3 at all. And if you think about it, when we dive into these different areas, you'll see if a child under the age of 3 is in front of a TV, they might not be as engaged in learning how to crawl or how to walk or how to refine their fine motor skills, which are absolutely inherent in a child's development and the activities that we all need to do as human beings, learning to write, to feed ourselves, right? And even language, there's language exposure when young children are watching TV, most certainly, but they're not being able to get this range of exposure like we could provide if we were preparing a special environment just for them with these materials to allow them to explore and to be an active participant in the process. I think that's the other piece as well, is that watching television is such a passive activity that the child is not getting the opportunity to explore the connection between their hand and their brain, which Dr. Montessori talked about at length of how important that connection really is for learning, that children need to get their hands on things and have this concrete experience in order for true learning to take place. So we'll dive in now and look at those six sensitive periods that Dr. Montessori described. The first that we'll take a look at is language. So the sensitive period for language takes place throughout that span of birth to age 6, and it includes different periods. There's a period for expressive language, a period for reading, and a period for writing. So throughout this time, children will start to watch the mouths of those around them. Think about even a very young baby. They start to focus on an adult's face and to watch their mouth moving. They'll begin to babble. They'll mimic what other people are saying. And soon thereafter, this language explosion occurs. Think about a young child and how they go from just saying a few words, and before you know it, their vocabulary has expanded to 50 and then 100 words so quickly. Around the age of 3.5, then, children become fascinated with letters and numbers. They attempt to reproduce them, writing with a pencil or a pen or a marker on a sheet of paper and trying to copy what they see other people writing. And Dr. Montessori actually found that this fascination with writing letters and numbers happens before a fascination with reading. So typically, in the educational system, we introduce reading before writing. In the Montessori pedagogy, we actually introduce writing before reading because of this observation that Dr. Montessori made in that appearance of the sensitive period for writing preceding reading. A spontaneous interest in the symbolic representations of sounds with each letter and the formation of words. So that interest in reading, she said, happens a little bit later, sometime between the ages of 3 and 5. Just checking the chat here. So then with that knowledge, what can we do as the adults to encourage and promote this sensitive period for language? We can use rich vocabulary so that children are being exposed to a lot of different words. Name everything in the child's environment using the proper terms. Read and sing to a child frequently or with them frequently, and have conversations with them. Even if the child isn't able to respond, even if it's a very young child, a baby, pause and give them time to just process what you're saying and then respond if they're able to. If you're thinking, some people call this sports casting. So if you're going to get the child some milk from the refrigerator, you can say to them, I'm going to go get your cup and get you some milk from the refrigerator. It might seem a little over the top for us as an adult to say what we're doing as we're doing it, but it really is helpful for the child to hear this vocabulary and start to understand what's happening around them. So the next sensitive period we're going to take a look at is the sensitive period for order. So between 1 to 5 years old, a child will likely enter this sensitive period. Some say it even happens earlier, around 6 months of age, and that there's a peak that happens around 18 months old. This sensitive period is characterized by this desire for consistency, repetition, this innate need for predictability and routine. Children have a passionate love for these established routines, and they can really be deeply disturbed by disorder. Thinking back to that explanation we had earlier, when the children have those negative manifestations, if we're interrupting the order, if we change their bedtime routine, that's when we might see those emotional responses because we're interrupting that sensitive period. So this time, right, think about 1 to 5 years old, the terrible 2s, the 3s, it's marked by quite often a lot of tantrums and seemingly unexplained fussiness, right? Because we're not looking below the surface as the adult to figure out what's happening. And it really may likely be a disruption to the child's sense of order that they're craving within this sensitive period. So then with that in mind, what can we do as the adults to encourage and promote a sense of order? We can establish clear ground rules with the child, carefully prepare that environment like we talked about, organizing it, making sure everything has a place and remains in its place, introduce activities that are aligned with the child's sense of order. A Montessori material for very young children is called an object permanence box. That's a great activity for promoting a sense of order. Other things like sorting works, like maybe having the child sort by color or by size or by shape. Those are great for appealing to a child who's in a sensitive period for order.
Heather
Uh,
White, can you go
yeah,
back and repeat what kind of box was that again?
it's called an object permanence box.
Can you
So
can you like unfold that, please?
absolutely. So it is a wooden base, a wooden rectangular base. And on one end is a box with a round hole in the top, and it comes with a ball. And so the idea is that the child drops the ball into the hole and it appears to disappear, right? So the child's building the concept of object permanence because they put the ball into the hole and it looks to them like it disappears, but then magically there's another hole on the bottom where it comes back out into the base. So if you're looking, if you can see my hands, if I have a rectangular base and the cube is on this side that I drop the ball into, and then the ball comes out the other side and rolls towards me as the child. And it's absolutely fascinating to see a child use this material when they're very young, because you can see that awe and that wonder, because it's like a child playing peekaboo, where it looks like they think you disappear and then you come right back. It's the same idea with the object permanence box, that it appears to them that the ball disappears and then magically it reappears. And Maria Montessori did a lot of research to show that actually helps the child develop that idea of object permanence. Um, Thank you for asking that. Sometimes when you are in the world of Montessori, you forget things like that other people might not be familiar with. So I appreciate you asking me to pause. The other thing I wanted to note here is the picture of a child vacuuming. So it's interesting. Some people feel like these are just meaningless chores, but if you really pay attention and observe children in this age from 1 to 5, they really enjoy doing things like sweeping, dusting, washing dishes. And it is appealing to their sensitive period for order. That's what they like, is that it is giving them this sense of organization, of cleanliness. And so these are activities that children this age will really enjoy and will support their sensitive period as well. The other thing we want to do as adults is use consistent routines to give a child a preparation if there's going to be a change in routine or a transition. You might say something, if you're at the park, you might say something like, we have 5 more minutes before we need to leave. Would you like to go down the slide one more time or swing on the swings? So you're giving them a preparation, you're giving them a sense of autonomy, letting them choose. You can talk to them about what's happening and what's going to come next. And then also acknowledge and validate their feelings when they're upset because something is out of order. When something doesn't happen in a way that they expected or isn't typical, letting them know that you understand. I can see that you're feeling really frustrated or sad. I wonder if it's because we didn't get to go play outside today since it's raining. Just making sure that they know that they're heard. Let's see, I'm checking the chat here. I saw some notifications. I see someone asking how to use this if a child is diagnosed with autism or children who might be have that diagnosis later. So all of these sensitive periods occur regardless of whether a child is neurotypical or neurodivergent. So each of these sensibilities Dr. Montessori described happen in all children. It's interesting because Dr. Montessori's background, when she first developed her pedagogy, she was actually in a facility with children who were deemed mentally unstable. These were children who were removed from society and in a mental health facility. And then she worked with children who were in a really low socioeconomic environment. And she found the same observations to be true despite all of those different backgrounds of the children. So the next sensitive period we're going to take a look at is the sensitive period for tiny detail or small objects. So between the ages of 1 to 3, children also become fascinated with really small things. This can help a child develop concentration. It can also help them integrate other sensibilities, like the development of their fine motor skills so that they can develop that pincer grasp that they use to later write as they're picking up these tiny objects. And it can also help us better understand a child's sensitive period for order because they might organize all of these very small objects. I see a note here in the chat, a list of getting started in Montessori methods literature. Yep, we can cover that. I do have some recommendations at the end of this presentation of where to find more information, so we'll cover that then. Some clear ground rules to establish. That's, in the classroom, we try to keep it really simple. And we talk about the 3 R's: respect for oneself, respect for others, and respect for the environment. And that, when we think of environment, not just the nature outside, but the environment that we exist within. So if you're thinking about the home, that would be environment for the things that are in the home, meaning that we want to keep our things neat and tidy, that if we use something, we want to put it away. And all of that really comes down to modeling as the adult. And you want to offer the child choices so that they feel a sense of autonomy and independence. Let's see, I see 2 more questions that came in. How do you recognize and support sensitive periods, and what happens if the child misses a sensitive period? So recognizing and supporting, recognizing are going to be looking for that intense focus, concentration, that joy, that they want to repeat an activity over and over and over again. Those are all ways that you will recognize that a child's in a sensitive period. To support them looks a little different for each sensitive period. So when we're talking about encouraging and promoting the sensitive periods, those would be ways that you would support them. You can provide these opportunities and materials for a child that's not in the sensitive period, and they may very well explore them, but they're not going to do so with the same intense concentration and have that same joy and focus unless they're in a sensitive period. So it's not that we can, it's not that we can force a child into a sensitive period just by providing them the materials. They will very well get there when it is right for them. Dr. Montessori really explains that children know instinctively what their minds and bodies need at different times to learn and grow, and that it looks different for every child, and that we need to honor that and follow the child's lead. She talked a lot about following the child. So it's really just about preparing the environment and then observing the cues when a child is in different sensitive periods, and then introducing more activities that support that sensitive period that you've observed. And the second piece here, what happens if a child misses a sensitive period? So if you're thinking back to when we talked about positive and negative manifestations, you'll probably start to see those negative manifestations because the child isn't getting their needs met in regard to that sensitive period. And then afterwards, it's just going to go away. When they're out of the sensitive period, if it hasn't been met, you just won't see them being drawn to those things anymore. And then let's say if we're looking at the sensitive period for movement, right? Maybe the child wasn't given enough opportunity to learn to crawl and to learn to walk. They were always being held by adults, and so they weren't able to practice. So that might be fussiness in the moment, because what they really want to do is get down on the ground and learn to crawl and walk. Outside of that window for sensitive period, you might not see that fussiness anymore because they don't have this instinctive drive to want to do the activity. However, what you're going to notice is the child is struggling with walking. It's very challenging for them. It's this intense effort that's required now in order to learn how to do it because we've missed that window for the sensitive period. It doesn't mean the child won't learn to walk. It just means that it might not be as exciting to them. There might not be the same joy, and it's going to take a little more time and effort on their part in order to master that skill. Should we remind a toddler that it's time to start crawling, stand up, or take the first steps in walking? If you're thinking about following the child and what Dr. Montessori said about children instinctively knowing what their minds and bodies needed to learn and grow, those reminders shouldn't be necessary. The child should be internally driven to do those things if they're in this sensitive period. You can provide them opportunities to explore those things. So let's say that developmentally, it's the time that a child should be interested in starting to learn to crawl. You could put toys that they're really interested in just outside of their reach. So you're encouraging and promoting this sensitive period in movement, this desire to want to crawl because they want to grab those toys that they're really interested in. But you're not necessarily saying outright, okay, let's practice crawling. I'm going to put you down. Let's crawl. Same thing with standing up. You can prepare the environment, have an ottoman or some kind of sturdy piece of furniture available to them that they can practice pulling up on. Dr. Montessori developed something called the Montessori pull-up bar, which really looks kind of like a ballet bar with a mirror behind it. And it's the same idea that the child's just able to grab onto it and start practicing pulling themselves up. So when we talk about the prepared environment, that's really what we're looking at, is observing the child's sensitive periods and what it is that they're really working on and interested in, and then adding things to the environment that allow them to explore that naturally and independently. Great questions. So since we talked about then this sensitive period for tiny details and small objects, so let's look at how we can encourage and promote that interest. So we can do so, much like we talked about for the other sensitive periods, by creating this prepared environment. For this particular sensitive period, that might look like adding beautiful details like artwork, flowers, handmade crafts that are at the child's eye level, and make sure those beautiful details are things that are meaningful to you and to your family and to the child's culture. Another great idea is incorporating a small plant that the child can watch grow and can help to take care of and watch it change every day. You can go on a child-led nature walk, allowing the child to stop and to look for small bugs, maybe collect things like rocks or twigs or sticks and acorns. And then there are also lots of Montessori activities that use small objects, because Dr. Montessori noticed that children were so interested in these tiny little things. One example is having a child match a small animal figurines. So you might have a basket with 6 matching small animals. You might have 2 cows and 2 pigs and 2 dogs, and the child is matching them. So again, that's appealing to their sensitive period for order, while also appealing to a sensitive period for tiny details and small objects. The next sensitive period is one we've talked quite a bit about so far. It's a sensitive period for movement. And Dr. Montessori said this takes place from birth until about the age of 4.5 to 5. Children grow physically and mentally so much during these first 6 years of their life. Even from the very first moments after they're born, babies start to flail their arms, tense and relax their muscles, but it doesn't stop there. If you take some time to observe a toddler, if you just sit back and watch, it's amazing how many steps they take, how they pick something up and move it from one side of the room to the other, how they pick things up and put them back down over and over again. And it's not that they have a lack of attention, that they're not able to focus on what they're doing. It's this need for constant movement. It's because they're in this sensitive period. And these sensibilities for movement aren't just gross motor skills like crawling, walking, climbing, but also refinement of fine motor skills. So reaching, grasping, that pincer grasp we talked about, where they can pick up those tiny objects. And during this time, what starts out as random movements become very controlled and coordinated movements. So from 2.5 to 5, children have these experiences and sensitivities to refining and coordinating their movements. So for example, like we said, that pincer grasp, right? At first, it might be a whole hand grasp, and they realize they kind of fumble because it's smaller. So they start to learn how to use pincer grasp to hold small objects, and then also learn how to release things voluntarily. Gross motor skills, if you think about crawling, becomes walking, and then walking turns into running, balancing, jumping. Those are all more coordinated and refined movements. Let's see, it looks like some of us never outgrow picking beach pebbles, nice pieces of woods, nice stones. Absolutely. I love going to the beach and looking at sea glass and all of the beautiful shells. As far as I remember, I grew up in an outdoor environment. Why should absolutely that should continue throughout one's life. That it's a wonderful way to connect with nature. And when I was a nanny, one of my favorite things, like I said, was going on a child-led nature walk, letting her lead the way and just knowing how fascinating it is to us as adults and seeing that same joy and wonder in her eyes as she picked up these pieces of nature. It really is incredible. So to encourage and promote a sensitive period for movement, we can prepare the environment to give the child opportunities to move, maybe placing things just outside of their reach, like we talked about, so that they're encouraged to roll over or to crawl, having those low, sturdy pieces of furniture so that they can practice pulling themselves up. We can also give them materials like puzzles, or in Montessori, what are called practical life activities like pouring, tonging, scooping with a spoon, or even introducing eating utensils so that the child can develop those fine motor skills. We can also involve children in everyday tasks so that they can start learning to do things to practice self-care, like brushing their teeth, brushing their hair, helping them learn how to dress themselves, giving them as much freedom as we can. So we think a lot about putting children in what Montessori called containers, right? We have bumbo seats, we have bouncers, we have swings, skipping these things and really maybe just laying the child on a floor. Dr. Montessori talked about a movement mat where we could just lay the child on the floor and have a few things near them that could capture their attention. And really, even children are so fascinated by the world around them. Sometimes just letting them look up and explore what's around them in their environment is fascinating to them. And then also give children opportunities to exert what's called maximum effort. And for those who might not be familiar, this is a child's need to exert their most strength by doing what's known as heavy work. It's a proprioceptive sensory input, so this deep, heavy pressure. And some common examples are carrying heavy objects, throwing, pushing things that are heavy, like you might have the child push a laundry basket to the laundry room, emptying the washing machine or the dryer is an example, carrying groceries inside. All of these things will give the child an opportunity to experience this maximum effort. And the next sensitive period is the sensitive period for sensorial exploration. And this takes place between birth to 5. And this is when children are refining their senses, sense of taste, smell, touch, sight, and sound. It's marked by a fascination with sensorial experiences that leads a child to learn to observe and really make refined sensorial discriminations, being able to sort things by color, the way that they sound, the way that they taste. So providing children with sensorial experiences that are really rich will engage their senses and is the best way, looking ahead here, is the best way to encourage and promote this ability for them to explore. So creating that prepared environment where these rich experiences occur, giving them access to that rich outdoor environment, right? This is the overlap of sensitive periods again. They're getting the sensorial exploration and being able to see these tiny details and small objects. Introduce new and exciting foods. For the different 5 senses, you might provide activities like flower smelling. You could do smelling jars where the child matches herbs or spices just based on scent. Look at art or books and identify visual differences. You could introduce feeling texture so the child can see what feels rough or smooth or light and heavy. Tasting bottles where the child matches things by taste is a fun activity. Mouthing for very young children, they like to put everything in their mouth. That's the way they're exploring their world sensorially. So giving them opportunities to do that. listening to different types of music or playing instruments, learning a second language. Those are all ways to help appeal to a child's sensitive period for sensorial exploration. And then pictured here, Dr. Montessori developed a lot of different didactic materials that were developed specifically for refinement of the senses. There's actually an entire area of a Montessori classroom for 2.5 to 6-year-olds called the sensorial area. And so this is known as a knobless cylinder. There are knob cylinders, which are the wooden material with the little knobs on the top of them on the shelf. And then you also have the brown stair on the bottom shelf. And you can see that all of these things allow the child to start to discriminate and compare things based on their senses, whether that's by shape, by width, by height, by color. This area of the classroom is really designed for the sensitive period that Dr. Montessori saw in young children. Is it during the sensitive period where we need to be aware of the child's emotional intelligence? Yeah, so sensitive periods you'll have an insight into emotional intelligence because you'll be able to see them expressing how they're feeling when their needs are met versus when they're not. And the sensitive period that I think really aligns mostly with emotional intelligence kind of comes into play in the very next sensitive period we're going to talk about, which is grace and courtesy, which is those social behaviors, that social emotional development. So we're going to talk about that more in just a second. I also say, or C, would you say there are stages where the child learns tolerance of anxiety or fear? And so there's not necessarily a sensitive period that Dr. Montessori described, but there is a lot of research now to show that risky play is really, really important for young children and developing that tolerance of anxiety and fear. It's giving them a way to control their experiences, to take risks that they're comfortable with, to learn cause and effect, but in a way that's safe. So a couple of slides back, there was a material, let's see if I can find it here. This is called a Pickler triangle. It was actually developed by Emmy Pickler, so not a Montessorian, but has a philosophy very similar to Montessori. And this is a way that you can introduce children to risky play in a way that feels safe for them. It's at the child's level. They'll only go up. You could even introduce this to a very young child. I saw a picture not too long ago of a child who wasn't even walking yet, so under the age of 1, who started to climb the Pickler triangle, and the parent was worried that it was dangerous, but she said the child would only put his foot up on the first or second rung and then would come back down. So it really is about following their lead, but giving them opportunities that they can take risks in a way that feels safe to them, that they're ready for, and that helps them develop this self-confidence that takes away some of that anxiety and fear. At what age does a child catch up with mother tongue when it comes to the area of language? So going back to that sensitive period for language, the foundation for learning a child's native language really does happen that full range from 0 to age 6. By the age of 6, a child should have a strong foundation in their native language or in a second language if it's been introduced. And if not, then there might be some concern that you want to look more deeply into there. Of course, it will continue to develop. Remember, we talked about that. These sensitive periods do have extensions where other things will be added in, or an interest may remain, but that foundation should still be there. I see the presentation should be made available. I did send it over, so I believe it will be. Dr. Lambert can share with us about that, I think at the end of the presentation. And then one last comment. Some people talk about critical
We are
period.
recording. We record the live
Perfect.
sessions, so they're available on the left in the quick menu on your student platform. You'll see a section for live sessions. Just click on there and you'll see the live sessions. You can also go to the AIU YouTube channel and look in the video list, and you'll see all of the live sessions recorded there.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Lambert. Sometimes I understand some people talk about critical periods and others say sensitive periods. They are the same. Critical periods is a term that's sometimes used for people outside of the field of Montessori, where sensitive periods is the term Dr. Montessori herself developed. How do you integrate an egocentric child to interact with other children? So a lot of these questions, a couple of the questions we've had relate to the next sensitive period. So I'm going to jump to that, and then we'll come back to that question. I think it's important to consider that when we look at the planes of development, which I'll touch on in the presentation next week, that children are very egocentric at this period in their life, and it's because that's what they need at that time. So it's equally as important to give them the experiences to just be within themselves, to continue to model what it looks like to relate to others, but to know that that's perfectly normal part of their development. So around the age of 2.5, a child enters a sensitive period for social skills or manners, what Dr. Montessori referred to as grace and courtesy. This is the mimicking polite and considerate behaviors, and then they start to internalize what those things mean. Dr. Montessori said social grace, inner discipline, and joy. These are the birthright of the human being who has been allowed to develop essential human qualities. And these essential human qualities are learned by watching parents, caregivers, teachers, and then children start to carry these manners that they're absorbing and that they establish at a young age with them throughout their life. Some common examples of grace and courtesy are asking for a turn, introducing oneself, greeting someone, holding the door for someone, how to cough or sneeze in a polite way, giving and receiving compliments, respecting someone's personal space, and waiting patiently. It's also during this sensitive period for grace and courtesy that a child starts to move from that independent play, from that more egocentric view, to wanting to build friendships and playing with other children rather than just next to them or alongside them. And so it's important to give them opportunities to do so. So when we're thinking about encouraging and promoting the sensitive period, we're going to model those manners and courtesies so that children can absorb them from us. Trust the child to develop the manners on their own without forcefully encouraging their use. Give them opportunities to spend time with children their age and practice those skills. And if there's a disagreement between children, helping them by just stating what you see. You might say something like, "Oh, you want to play with the red truck, but your friend is playing with it right now. What can we do?" Or helping them brainstorm ideas if they're really young or they're struggling. You could say something like, "Maybe we could ask if we could use it when they're all done. Would you like to do that?" Or something like, "Would you like to play with the blue truck while you wait? Or would you just like to sit and watch until it's your turn?" So again, giving them choices so that they feel that sense of autonomy. So I wanted to close today's session with another quote from Dr. Montessori about how important sensitive periods really are. So she said, "The sensitive period, it comes for a moment, but its benefits last a lifetime." So for parents, caregivers, educators, understanding these sensitive periods can not only help set a child up for success, but also really makes our life easier because the child's going to remain engaged and joyful in what they're doing. Since most young children, thinking about babies and toddlers, can't really articulate what they are needing or what they want or what their interests are, it is our job to educate ourselves, observing them, and then supporting them along the way. Knowing about these sensitive periods gives us the tools that we need to prepare that environment and to understand what we're seeing so that we can help them refine those skills and develop that knowledge that they're seeking. So I know there was a question earlier where someone wanted to know where they could learn more. What are some sources where they could read about Montessori? So I encourage you to take a look at some of these resources. The first book here is The Absorbent Mind. That's by Dr. Montessori herself. It's great about covering a lot of theory. I will warn you that it is a heavy read. It's very in depth, but it gives a lot of really great information about how Dr. Montessori developed her pedagogy and her philosophy for this first 6 years of life. The next shown here is the Montessori Toddler. This is for children ages 1 to 3. There's also a version called the Montessori Baby for children from 0 to 1 years old. And this is by Simone Davies. This is a really practical guide. There's a section about sensitive periods that's really informative. And then the third is How to Raise an Amazing Child the Montessori Way by Tim Selden. And again, there's a lot of really great practical information about the topic of sensitive periods here. I see we have some questions, and just really quick before I answer those, I just wanted to say thank you again for having me. My contact information is here, and I'll leave this up as I answer questions. Feel free, if you have questions after today, to send me an email. My website is there, along with my LinkedIn if you want to connect, as well as my social media page. It's Montessori Matters, where I share a lot of content related to Montessori, education, parenting. So it would be wonderful if you guys checked that out as well. I would be honored if you wanted to follow along and join in. So let's see, we had a couple more questions here. Is this similar to the humanistic view of Maslow? So Montessori at the core does have a very humanistic view. She believed in a holistic approach to education and appealing to the child as a whole being. So she not only talked about academic, I apologize, my dog sees her, I don't know if you can see her in my camera, she sees her reflection, and so she started growling. So it is very much about appealing to the whole child, social, emotional development, as well as academic, intellectual. And then I believe I saw another question. What can be done for a child that has grown beyond the sensitive period? So again, it's really going to be about supporting them and just encouraging. So you're going to need to be understanding that it's going to be something that might be more stressful or more tiresome for the child. They're probably going to have some big feelings. So acknowledging and validating their feelings, letting them know that you recognize that they're working hard or that it might be frustrating to them, offering support where you can. And again, it goes back to preparing that environment, to making sure that what the child needs to be successful is there, in addition to that emotional support that you're providing them as well. Any other questions? I think we covered everything in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure if anyone had anything else they were wondering.
Beyond 6 years of age, when it starts going up 7, 8, 9 years old, are there any different things that begin to happen? Are sensitive periods different in some way?
Absolutely. So Dr. Montessori kind of hinted towards sensitive periods that happen after that time. She didn't dive deeply into them like she did for the ones for birth to 6, but some of the things that have been identified in some of her writings, and then also by Montessorians since that time, are things like a sensitive period for social justice, a sensitive period for learning about one's place in the world. Those are things that are happening in the elementary and adolescent years. Sensitive period for money starts to happen in the elementary years, like starting to understand how money works, what that looks like, the process of like the economy. And it's really, you know, and the looking mostly at elementary, so 6 to 12, which would cover that next plane of development that Dr. Montessori talked about. It really is about understanding yourself and understanding the world around you. So there's a lot of interest in what Dr. Montessori talked about as cosmic education. So how the world works, how people relate to one another, how I relate to you. And then that next plane of development, which is adolescence, is really about developing one's self-identity, understanding who you really are and who you want to be in the future. So like I said, there's not as much written from Dr. Montessori herself. She hints at it throughout various texts, but there has been more observation and study from Montessorians in the field.
There's some things in the news right now that the new generation coming up that's kind of been raised on the internet, that they're not doing very well in their jobs, and they're being fired more than usual because they're easily offended. They don't take criticism very well. They're not focused. They're not relating. Is the internet interrupting these periods?
I think so. It would be really interesting to do some research on that. But if you think about, how we talked about needing to provide opportunities for children to explore these sensitive periods, if I'm in front of a screen, whether that's a TV or a computer, I might be picking up some things, right? We talked about how a child might be learning some things about language or perhaps some things about grace and courtesy, but they're certainly not getting that hands-on, in the moment, real experiences because they're being replaced by the internet and the TV. And so I definitely think that that's going to change and alter development because these are such foundational periods. It doesn't mean that changes couldn't be made, right? Let's say that I had trouble socializing with my peers and that impacted my employment. Let's say I was let go and it was a wake-up call to me. This is something I really need to work on. You could definitely be very intentional and learn those social skills and improve them, but it's going to require a lot more time and effort, and definitely won't be as joyful of an event as it would have been if a child would have been given those opportunities when they were young.
Wow, that is such powerful information. We have a question coming in from Rossi, Praise TV. Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon from here, Dr. Lambert and Dr. Heather White, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, that's a very interesting presentation. Okay, my question is this. Going by what you've just explained to us, talking about the importance of child growth from infancy, right? Making them aware of their environment, learning behavioral, objective, let me put it that way. Okay, a child that has not been well given attention from infancy, maybe because his or her parent, or maybe, let me take, for example, someone who is a single parent probably would want to put up all energy into his or her work, to raise up the child, to pay bills and stuff. I may not really have that luxury of time to take out the child maybe for vacation or, to go to parks to mix up with other kids and always busy and, trying to make ends meet. That way, that particular child growing up is also lacking some values, right? Okay, because education, like you just explained, is not only only about the parents, the society as well, right? The environment. The child should go out to explore. Okay, now that particular child has grown to a teenager, and is misbehaving a lot. Because of course, while he or she is growing up, they lack some values. It's not about intelligence, it's not about, but about some behavioral attitude, you understand, not trying to comply to, norms and, respect, so to speak. So that particular child, can it still be brought back to book? Can it still be curtailed? Because now he's a teenager, talking about a 14 years or a 15 years or a 16-year-old child. What kind of value how can you make that child now? Because he or she has grown up and they feel, oh, I can't, I'm grown, you can't tell me what to do. So how can you tame that kind of child to be what you want him or her to be? That's my question.
Absolutely. That's a great question. It's really interesting. We talked a little bit, I mentioned a few times, the planes of development. So if we look at the planes of development, you have that Dr. Montessori described, you have 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, and then 18 and beyond, 18 to adulthood is how she described it. So there is a lot of overlap between 0 to 6 and 12 to 18. and then also 6 to 12 and 18 and beyond. So think about a toddler and a teenager. There's quite a lot of similarities that Dr. Montessori described between the two of them. It's a period of this desire for autonomy and independence. It looks very different. A toddler wants to be able to walk on their own and to pour their own juice and to prepare their own snack. A teenager wants to be left alone, to be able to go out with their friends, to exert their own independence and making their own choices. It's the same idea, just a little bit different of what it kind of comes down to as far as logistics. And they're also both very egocentric, going back to a point that was made in the chat. It's hard for them to see outside of themselves. I just see what I need and what I want. So it really is, as the adult, about appealing to their needs and knowing that that's where they are and meeting them where they are. So knowing that what they're seeking is independence and autonomy and control, giving them those opportunities. And so let's say, for instance, you are wanting the child to do maybe they have chores that they need to do. And so letting them know that you acknowledge and you validate how they feel. I know it's really not what you want to do to make your bed. There's a lot of times I don't want to make my bed. It's not the most fun thing to do. Would you like to make your bed on your own, or would you like some help, right? So you've acknowledged how they feel. You validated that it's okay to feel that way. You don't have to want to make your bed, and we're still going to make your bed, right? You've acknowledged, but this is still the limit. I hear you. This is what has to happen. And then trying to give them choices within that, whether that's when they do it, how they do it, whether they do it with support or on their own. Anytime that you can give them a choice. So even though, I don't like to say it's tricking them, but it kind of is tricking them, because they feel like they're still in control, just like the toddler does. When you say, we need to put our shoes on, it's time to go to school. Would you like to put the left shoe on or the right shoe? The shoes are going on. That's not the choice. The choice is, which shoe do you want to put on first?
So your advice is we should allow them make them choices.
Yes.
What if the choice they make is wrong?
Then that's an open conversation, right? Talk to them about be very, Dr. Montessori talked about showing humility, being vulnerable, letting the child know that we make mistakes. When I was your age, whatever the situation is, give them something that they can relate to, and then talk to them about what happens when you make bad choices or choices that aren't preferable. Talk to them about what they could do differently next time. And children that are obviously, right, talking about the similarities in toddlerhood and adolescence, toddlers aren't going to be able to understand that, but adolescents very much will be able to understand what you're saying. And come at it from a place of understanding and empathy, really trying to make that connection with them. A term that's really helpful is connection before correction. So before you try to correct their behavior, build that basis of trust, of belonging, of safety and security, so that they understand you're helping rather than trying to coerce them a certain direction.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I think we have another question here.
Yes, from Ebi Arede. I'm going to ask him to unmute his microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation that is very elaborate and very educative on raising children. One thing that worries me as children grow up, particularly the girl child. For us in Nigeria, in Africa, there is this tendency of parents giving out their children at early age. Mm-hmm. And there is this tendency of these young ladies trying to relive a life, a period that they were deprived of, particularly when they find themselves in their husband's house at an early age. They were unable to live the youthful life expected of them while growing up.
Mm.
So what are the things that one can really do to really make them, because at that time they will just be feeling that they have lost something that they would have actually enjoyed while they were growing up, but they were denied of it. So at the stage that they are, that are living an adulthood at a young age, they will still want to relive that life that they were deprived of. So what are the advice that you actually want to give to really reorganize this kind of girl to live a normal life? Because those things really bring about marriage, divorce, and all the rest happening even within Africa.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, although a different topic, I think that it's a similar answer to what I was saying just a moment ago. I think it really comes down to acknowledging and validating their experience, letting them know that you recognize that they missed some of those opportunities that maybe they're longing for. Sharing any kind of experience that you have that you can relate to them so that they know they're not alone, and then offering choices, letting them see how they can explore those feelings of things that they've lost or that they're missing in ways that are appropriate. Maybe giving them guidance, like I did see in the chat a moment ago, someone mentioned letting them know the repercussions of the choices being made. So talk to them about, these are different choices that you have. These are different things that might happen if you make these different choices, and really having a conversation, an open, honest, vulnerable conversation about what those choices might lead to, and what it is that they're looking for, and ways that they can get there in ways that are healthy and promote that development, but meet those needs that they're feeling are unmet. I did see a question in the chat. Are the books that I mentioned sold on Amazon? They are, yes. And I did see, Dr. Lambert, I did see your note. If you give me 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will most definitely put the presentation, a PDF of the presentation, into the chat. I think we have a couple more questions if we want to maybe.
That would be great, because a lot of the participants are asking for the presentation.
Absolutely.
And we have there's a question coming in from Chris Akoti. He has a question, but I don't see the question yet, so it's on its way. And then Pretty Doob, Montessori believes in saying, let children be children and not many adults.
Yes, absolutely. Following them in their journey, giving them what they need. It's interesting because sometimes those experiences might be things that we think of as adult experiences, like I was saying earlier, sweeping and vacuuming, but it really is looking for what brings them joy. Great. I think we have a couple questions as well with hands raised, and I'm almost finished with uploading the document, and then it will be there for everyone.
Yeah, we should only have about 5 more minutes left. So we'll have to limit the quick questions to brief answers.
Absolutely. Let's see, I see Dr. Ribdi.
Yes, but I'm going to go to Chris Akoti first, who's been trying to ask a question for a while.
Oh, I apologize. Everybody was so small on the side of my screen, so I didn't see you. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. I apologize.
Can you unmute your microphone? There you go.
Yeah, please. My question is that, example, like someone have a son, age of 6 years, but yet are behaving some ways that the parent always beat the child to force him to sit down or to stop doing that. Some few minutes time, the child will just do the same thing. So the parents are thinking maybe something is going wrong, not spiritually or physically. They are just confused. What a solution can be get to that child?
It sounds like it's a sensitive period for movement. If you have a child that isn't sitting down and then you are, for however is the approach, whether you're encouraging them or it's physically, you're making them sit down and they stand right back up again. It's not that they're trying to be defiant. It's that they have this internal need, this internal drive to move. Their body and their brains are telling them, I need to move, and they're listening to it. So Montessori really requires us to step back and to look at what's happening, to take ourselves and how we feel and what we need out of the situation so that we can meet the child's needs. So perhaps in that situation, you step back and you think the child needs movement. What is it that I need? What is it that they need? Can I set a timer and let them do jumping jacks for 3 minutes and let them know when the timer is up, we need to sit down at the table to eat dinner together, or whatever the activity is that you need them to sit down for. And tell them in 10 more minutes, we'll take another minute break and you'll be able to move then. But really making sure that you give the children opportunities to have their needs met. Otherwise, you're going to see that negative manifestation. They're going to keep doing it. It's going to appear as misbehavior because they're trying to get their needs met that they feel internally they might not be able to communicate through words.
Yeah, but this is the practical thing that currently, as I'm talking to you, is something that is going on. The child only gets scared of the father, and yet other people in the house, apart from the father, it doesn't get scared of anyone. And the child will be jumping, hitting the foot or the leg on the floor, or doing all sorts of things. And does it call for beating for the child to stop? Or what next solution can be found for that particular child?
So the things that you're describing are all things that are very developmentally normal. A child of this age needs the movement. They need to jump. When you're talking about kind of beating the food, they're not doing it to misbehave. They're doing it because that's the way they're learning about cause and effect. They're learning about what happens when I drop the food on the floor. It really is just how they're observing and understanding how the world works. And so if it is not appropriate that they're jumping wherever they're jumping, or obviously we don't want them to throw food on the floor, giving them ways that are appropriate that meets those needs is really what we need to look for. So ways that we can give children that time to do those things in a way that we're okay with, so that when we need them to be still, we need them to eat their food. And right with the food, you can say, set a boundary. It doesn't have to be physical. You can say, we don't throw our food on the floor. If you throw your food on the floor, it tells me you're all done. Are you all done, or would you like to eat some more? And if they make the choice to eat some more and then they throw the food on the floor, you take the food and you calmly say, you're throwing the food on the floor, and that means we're all done. Thank you. And you take the plate away. So it's being very firm, very clear, in a way that lets the child know that the adult is the one that's setting and holding that boundary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. Lambert, I'm going to defer to you. I know you said we only had a few more moments, so.
Do you want to take another question?
Yeah, we can take one more.
Okay, Antwi Danielle. Oh, we can't hear you yet. Something about your microphone. I see your microphone is activated, but we can't hear you. Try to choose a different microphone. Let's go to Dr. Ribdi Al-Saidi. Let me try again to ask you to activate your microphone. There you go. I think we can hear you now. Oh, your microphone was active there for a second. Let me try again. There. Go ahead and talk.
Okay.
Yes.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hello.
I am from Gulf. I am from Kuwait. Just I have one question, please. There is a difference between children if we come to teach them, as there is a culture that differ from one child to another child.
Mm.
Like some food or like some drink. How is that right? The first, and how it is that possible to collection them from another culture?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like, you know, the question that you're asking is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I heard you talking about kind of choices and what that looks like as far as, you know, food and drink. And we as the adults are the ones that decide what the choices are. The child gets to make the choice, but we're the one deciding what those choices are. So if we're thinking about, you know, let's talk about a food, let's say the child's having a snack. We don't just say to the child, it's time to have a snack. What would you like? We say as the adult, we set the boundary. It's time that you can have a snack. Would you like to eat some carrots or would you like some strawberries? They have the choice then. They feel this power, this autonomy, because they're going to choose, but we've set the boundaries. We've set the limits. Dr. Montessori talked about freedom within limits. We're giving them the freedom, but the freedom exists within these boundaries, within these limits that we've set, so that we feel comfortable with the choices that are being made as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One last quick question from Adeniyi Tinubu. Hello.
Hello.
Good
Yeah,
day
good
to you.
morning. Yeah,
This is
good
our
morning.
last question, everybody.
Yeah, sure. So what I want to put in note is just like a kid of 3 years old, but if you adore him to do something and he felt he can do what he has in his mind. So for me, I believe you have to leave him at first. Let him achieve his aim, but just give me a guide, because that is the level where they are now. They need to exploit and do things on their own, due to sound or due to movement, according to what the doctor said. So for that, what do you think one can do as a guardian towards that kind of child? That's it.
So it sounds like you're saying when you're trying to guide the child, when they're wanting to do these things, or not wanting to do something that we need them to do. Is that correct? I think that is pretty similar to a question that's in the chat as well. How do we help children who do not want to do what they're told to do, even if it's something important? Again, it goes back, I know it sounds like a broken record, but it really is the basis of the Montessori philosophy of acknowledging and validating how they feel, setting that limit, and then giving them choices. Right? I hear you don't want to go to school. I remember when I was young, there were days I didn't want to go to school either. It's time to go to school now. Would you like to put on your shoes first, or would you like to get dressed first? So you've acknowledged and validated, you've connected with them before you corrected anything. They feel heard. They know that other people feel that way, have felt that way too. You've established that empathy. Then you've set the limit. All of that, and it's time to go to school. And then you give them a choice so that they feel a sense of control. I'm going to pop in the chat a book that's really great. There's different versions of it. The one for this specific age group is How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen. It's by Joanna Faber, and she has a co-author as well. There's other versions of How to Talk When Kids Won't Listen. There's one that's not for little kids and just for school age children, but that is a fantastic book that gives lots of different approaches of how to encourage children in those moments when they're not necessarily doing what we need them or want them to do, in a way that's respectful to them and encourages the behavior that we're looking for. That's a fantastic kind of series of books. There's different versions, like I said.
This is a really fascinating topic. So I'm wondering, what new topic would you come back and talk about the next time? Do you have a plan for that?
Absolutely. So next Friday, it would be 10 a.m. for me. I'm in Florida. So next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern time, we will be doing a presentation on the planes of development. So we talked a little bit about that today, about those planes of development that Dr. Montessori identified. So that will be a topic for next week. And then we also have another scheduled, and I apologize, I do not know the specific date right off the top of my head for that presentation. But the third presentation scheduled currently is about human tendencies. So that is another term that Dr. Montessori developed that really talks about these needs and things that drive human behavior. So similar and related to sensitive periods, but very distinctive in and of themselves.
There was a question here about, can children stop using video games to avoid losing full attention on their assignments?
Absolutely. So the video games, like we talked about, are going to certainly be distracting. They're providing that very, very rapid stimulation, which is what in the brain is drawing children towards them. It's almost addictive in a sense because of the stimulation that it's providing for the brain. So again, that's going to come back to us as the adults to acknowledge and validate that it is challenging for them to not be allowed to have the video games or the screen time, the TV, the computer. We're setting the limit. It's difficult, and it's time to step away from the video game to do our homework. And then give them choices. Would you like me to sit next to you and do my work while you do your work? Or would you like to do it in your room by yourself? You know, setting a timer and letting them know, we're going to be doing your homework for 20 minutes, or I want you to try it on your own while the timer goes, and then I will come back and check on how you're doing. So there's ways to kind of scaffold and offer them that support. But again, acknowledge and validate how they feel, set that limit, hold that boundary, and offer them choices where you can.
Antwi Daniel finally got his message in here. I think our religious terms or values can help us to develop the child's behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah, that spiritual foundation. Dr. Montessori talked a lot, actually. It's very fascinating. So Dr. Montessori was actually Catholic, and so she doesn't mention specific elements of Catholicism, but she talks about how important the spiritual transformation of the adult and of the child is, how we need to prepare ourselves. She talked about physical, intellectual, and spiritual preparation. And so I think you're absolutely right that our spiritual foundations, our religious beliefs, our religious tenets that we hold can really provide a guidance, a strong guidance in how we relate to children and how we help encourage them to make good choices, most definitely.
You know, one thing I did with my daughter when she was young is at the end of every day when she was going to sleep, we'd review the day. What happened during the day. And it just seemed like it was a good thing. I'm not sure, have you ever heard of something like that before?
Absolutely. It's those moments of connection. It's letting her know that you are invested in her experience. You want to know how her day was, what went well, what didn't go well. It's kind of like what we do internally when we reflect on experiences. You know, what did I enjoy about that? What was challenging for me? What would I do differently next time? And when it's a conversation that you're having as an adult with a child, you're forming that connection with them. They know that you care, that you want to know how their day was, and you can talk them through if there was something that didn't go well, that they didn't enjoy. You can talk about, well, what do you think you'd want to do differently tomorrow? Or talk to them about different choices that they could make and maybe what might have been an alternative outcome had they made a different choice. So absolutely, that's a fantastic thing to do. And in those moments before bedtime, especially, it's kind of this calming, reflective time. You can think about it as an adult of a time that you might do meditation or journaling or yoga, right? It's the same kind of idea, just this time to be very intentional and very reflective. Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do.
Well, it looks as though we've come to the end of questions and probably time. This would probably be a good place to stop and call it a well done presentation today on the sensitive periods of inspiration and development in young children. Thank you so much, Dr. Heather White, for all of this information. Do you have anything more you'd like to add?
Just thank you so much for being here. It's a joy and a pleasure and an honor as always. You all have such wonderful and thoughtful questions. So I appreciate each of you being here. And I hope to see you all at the future presentations as well.
You can all now unmute your microphones to say bye-bye, thank you, anything you want. Go ahead.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much for your
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you in the next presentation.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you too.
We are happy family.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Hi, Sibatunde
Oh
with
my goodness.
Little boy.
Oh, there's
Cute.
somebody in class.
Thanks
Lovely.
everybody, and thank you.
Doc,
for
someone
the
Charlie's
wonderful
already listening.
presentation.
Thank
Dr.
you
Heather.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much light
The
that you
children are
brought
even
to
listening,
us
so there will be positive change.
in this presentation. Thank you so much,
This is
Dr.
amazing. Thank you
Dr.
so
White.
much.
weekend, everybody.
I
We love
Bye,
you.
appreciate.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We love you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you. See you
you.
next time. Thank you so much.